All right, hopefully we have given everyone the opportunity to join who has registered. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Colin and I'm the product specialist at Saasyan. I joined the team about 6 months ago and continue to be inspired by our mission of ensuring online student safety. This is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about and raising awareness on some of the key issues that kids and students face in school today. In this session, we're going to be sharing a lot of really great content, all dealing with the overall well-being and online safety of K-12 students. I am joined today by two amazing panelists who are both extremely invested in this cause and will be sharing their insight and experience with student well-being. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Cecilia Martin, school psychologist at Melbourne High School, and Trent Ray, co-founder of the Cyber Safety Project. Thank you both for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
For today's agenda, we'll be starting with sharing some highlights from the month so far. Then I'll be sharing a little bit about my own high school experience in the public education system in the US. And we'll have some discussion with our panelists. And lastly, some time for Q&A with anyone in attendance. So if any of our attendees do have questions for our panelists, which we hope you do, or for myself, please pop them in the Q&A section and we'll run through these at the end. As well as feel free to utilize the chat. Our wonderful marketing coordinator, Beck, will be moderating. So at this point, we'd love to share a short video recap of the month so far and some of the insight gained from the students at the Future Well Fest in South Australia. Obviously had the opportunity to hear from some of the students, which was a really great opportunity. Very eye-opening statistics there. Cecilia, I would love to start with you on this and to hear your thoughts on just some of these statistics, particularly dealing with the 70% of students who have experienced cyberbullying in some form. Would you say that you've observed a similar pattern in your time at Melbourne High School?
We certainly do see it. But it is hard to see because it is one of those things that's very hidden. And often the victims don't want to talk about it. They don't want to come forward because they know there might be repercussions for them. And they really fear getting things becoming worse for them. I mean, we know from the E-Safety Commissioner that in the past 6 months, 44% of young people report having had cyberbullying. So if you think of about the lifetime prevalence, 70% makes sense, doesn't it? I think a lot of them don't necessarily recognise it's bullying. Both the people who are the victims and the people who are also doing the bullying wouldn't necessarily say that that's what they're doing. So there's a lack of understanding at times.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of crazy to see that progression and just how quickly things change. You and I have spoken a lot about just the language and the context, of dealing with students nowadays. Things that we might see and flag as absolutely cyberbullying sometimes has just become part of their language and how they're communicating. So that poses a challenge as well. Trent, you have facilitated some similar surveys among students on behalf of the Cyber Safety Project. Would you say that you've noticed some similar trends or numbers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. as Cecilia pointed out, I think that, we're talking about a lifetime of reports. 70% of children or young people report that they have been bullied in some way, shape, or form. But if we think about things as well, we also need to understand that young people, when they're completing these surveys, sometimes think about it as that, have you ever been bullied, rather than, when was the last time that it happened? So a lot of the work that we do with schools is actually find out in the last month or the last 6 months or the last 12 months as well, just so that we can get a better indication. Because as young people grow and develop, they start to understand a better different definition of what cyberbullying is. And if we can truly help young people understand not only what cyberbullying is, they can also recognize it themselves, but they could also recognize if potentially they are contributing to that as well. And I think it's really important too to highlight to young people that there are now laws around cyberbullying as well, which is a great way to start the conversation to help young people know that there are ways that they can get help and support as well. These laws are newer in our country here in Australia, and we're really fortunate to have legislation in place around this to help as one of the deterrents. But it's certainly is prevalent, and we know through the work that we do at eSafety, in partnership with eSafety as a trusted eSafety provider, that the reports of cyberbullying have certainly increased, particularly over the last 2 years, with so many more young people accessing technology for learning, connecting, and playing.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing that. As schools kind of shift to and from a hybrid environment, depending on the state of the world and COVID, I think that creates all the more opportunity for instances of bullying in the digital realm to take place. So going off of this, I would love to take you back about 10 years ago to my high school experience. Even in the last decade or so, there's been so many changes that have taken place. And I was fortunate enough to go through school primarily before a lot of these sort of things started happening. But it was still, Instagram and Snapchat had pretty much just taken off. Facebook was maybe a little bit past its peak. And at this stage, neither parents nor schools had any resources to be able to be involved in student online activity. This was before there was any sort of conversation on things like reducing screen time or increasing visibility to the activity of students. At this point in my life, around year 9 and 10, I had definitely left my elementary or primary school years behind, where I was really outgoing and confident and was genuinely just a very happy kid, and started to become quite anxious and depressed and withdrawn. I would say that for anyone looking in on the outside, they might have just thought that this was normal adolescent behavior, and that maybe I was just moody, and that this was an awkward time for a lot of kids as they start to pull away and crave that independence. But what they didn't know is that I was beginning to figure out that I was a little different, and that I didn't quite fit the societal heteronormative teenage boy, and that I was slowly starting to figure out that I was gay. Had anyone in my life had the ability to know some of what was going on in my online activity, they might have seen a search history of things like, am I gay? Or is being gay bad? Or gay test? Or maybe how to come out to your parents, or how to fake being straight. If someone had seen my message history, they would have seen that I was being threatened by the only person that knew this massive secret about myself, and was essentially holding that information over my head, threatening to out me if I wasn't available and responsive. So this was a really dark time for me, where I was pretty much glued to my phone out of the fear that if I didn't respond right away and wasn't available, that he might out me to the rest of the school. And this continued on for a period of several months. And I'm not telling any of this to gain the sympathy vote or dampen the mood, but I share this to hopefully spread awareness on what those with malicious intentions can do, and essentially the power that can be abused by digital communication, where every single message is logged. So fortunately for me, roughly a year after this, I ended up coming out, having a great experience that was met with support from family and friends. But this wasn't until after more than 2 years of struggling with depression and anxiety and my own identity, and ultimately even transferring high schools and losing a lot of friends in my attempt to kind of escape this. So I think about how different my experience would have been if even just one person had the ability to know some of what was going on in my online behavior and activity, and was able to pull me aside and just ask how I was doing, or create that safe and confidential space for me to open up. This was definitely not something that I was in a place to seek out, and was just feeling so isolated and alone. And at the time, my biggest fear was someone finding out or approaching me about any of these issues. But what I didn't know then is that if one person had done that, that would have ultimately been just what I needed to save myself several years of struggling. So my second question deals with that theme of independence versus intervention. So Cecilia, given that so many students, much like myself, have that need for privacy and independence while they navigate some of these years and discover who they are, how do you find the balance between allowing students to have the independence that they crave with the ability to intervene to ensure safety?
It is a really tough one because obviously safety is number one, but very soon after that comes that confidentiality and that privacy. And we know the teenage years are times when that independence is growing, and that ability to have a safe space, to know the parents won't necessarily find out, is really vital as well, for someone to have the confidence to be able to talk freely. So we certainly inform our students about that confidentiality and the limits to that confidentiality, which are really important. But we also try to, I suppose, use some of the information that we get through screening or through hearing things through teachers or other students to kind of inform what we do and what there's a need to do. So, recently we noticed there was an increase again in, I think it was last year, and they were using the word gay in a derogatory way. And we're like, okay, that was gone for a couple of years. And we had a lot of students calling it out, and it wasn't gone, it was reduced. And now it's back again. So being able to then address that as a whole school thing, not necessarily one-on-one basis with anyone in particular, but to be able to use that as a platform to go, okay, maybe we need some assembly talks about this. Maybe this is something that we need to address. In terms of what we screen as well, like the students know that we do screening, they know that that's there, they tend to forget. It's a little bit like the Big Brother scenario. So that they are sometimes surprised when I call them in to say, hey, I'm a bit concerned about this, or call them in for a general wellbeing check without necessarily saying why I'm doing that. So it's a constant struggle to try and balance both and to get the best of both worlds. But it's something that's really important to continue to do and to continue to try and navigate to the best of our ability.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, those years are among those where students do start to have more independence and freedom. Kids are starting to drive, and there's not quite as much structure to their lives. It's a really difficult balance to identify and acknowledge that that's kind of a given while students explore themselves and start to want that freedom, but also just the duty of care that while students are at school and under your care, that they're being safe, and that digital safety is protected and ensured the same way that you would see students actually well on campus, or younger students in the playground. You would always have an adult there to intervene. But as communications convert to more digital based, it's really hard to maintain that. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah. And that's certainly something we found during lockdowns. Just to add, we were always screening things that happened on the school network. And after a couple of parents raised concerns about some of the things that was happening on Microsoft Teams, we had to extend that so that whilst, we continue it now because there's so much interaction that happens on that platform, which is provided by the school, we also have to screen that now. And that's been very, very useful. I think that's where we get most of the things that we address through that.
Definitely. Yeah. I also think just recognizing that, all these students have such a diverse and different background, and they're all kind of united by the same school. So being able to facilitate that different mindset to be inclusive and welcoming, recognizing that may not be the norm for a lot of students, is also a challenging concept to navigate.
Absolutely.
Trent, in the Cyber Safety Project Digital Habits Survey from 2021, you found that 2 out of 3 kids don't feel comfortable approaching an adult with an issue, which I was clearly one of for several years. So how can you empower students to come forward and ask for help?
Yeah, I think that, as mentioned, we can use technology to really pick up on, possible things that might be happening within our community to be able to then have that intervention. And it's a really proactive way to really engage students with help-seeking strategies and promotion of help-seeking strategies and dialogue around the topics that are of concern. And one of the biggest reasons why we survey all students that we work with before we go and chat to them is because we want to know and understand what the trends are, what the challenges are, so that we can address those and provide students with the resources that they need. I think all of the conversations that we're having today are going to be about this idea of multi-pronged approaches to helping young people feel safe in their community. And that can be, can we leverage technology to be able to inform us so that we can then put things in place to support? But also, I think one of the things that we need to be doing is having really open conversations like we are today, which is awesome, to be able to come up with, I guess, strategies that we can use to support young people. And that is also having their voice heard in this kind of conversation, and making sure that they feel as though that they understand and have an ability to feel empowered to be able to seek the help and support from their trusted adults. So what we're talking with a lot of schools right now about is, what are we all doing as individuals to help young people know that it is safe for them to come and talk to us about these things? It's not just about having posters up around the school and saying, you know, here are the steps to get support. They need to hear those trusted adults in their lives talking positively about technology and not always negatively, so that they can see those, you know, mentors or those influence to them in their lives as people that are seen to be talking positively about technology as much as they might be talking negatively about it as well. There was an interesting study done last year by the Safety Commissioner in consultation with young people. And one of the big, I guess, pieces of feedback from young people was that they just want their adults around them to appear knowledgeable, that they know how to support them if things are going to go wrong, and that they have pathways to be able to get that support if they need that, and to really break down those barriers so that they don't feel like maybe they're going to get into trouble or stigmatized for asking for help and support. For example, a young person that might not yet be 13 might be scared to come and tell an adult that something's going wrong for them on a social network, because their adults around them are constantly saying you shouldn't be using it until you're 13. So there's going to be that barrier. So we have to reflect on ourselves, I think, as adults, and thinking, how do we act around technology? How do we talk about technology to young people who see this as a fundamental part of the way that they're growing up and connecting and playing, and really involve all stakeholders in those conversations? And then make sure that we're just starting that chat with young people, making sure that we don't just hope that they'd come to us for help and support, that we explicitly make them understand that we are here, that it is safe for them to come and talk to us. And I think that that's really the important thing, is showing and promoting that we're here to talk about these things, as well as having those underlying technologies or ways that we're trying to gain those insights as well to help us be more proactive.
Yeah, definitely. I think that point you made about stigma is really important to mention as well. You know, I remember even back to my high school experience, there were always posters around promoting seeking help and leaning on those that we can for support. But there was always that stigma, and taking that step to go in and, you know, have a meeting with your counselor or whomever was always a really difficult kind of construct that was established. What are some tools that schools can leverage to start breaking down that stigma? And what are the conversations that you think would be good to have with students?
Yeah, well, I think it's really fundamentally, first and foremost, so important for teachers and people within the school community just to be making sure that they're not just always talking negatively about technology, because I know that sometimes that's our default as adults, is to be just talking about the challenges and sometimes talking about the benefits of technology as well, so that they know and understand that we're here to talk about technology challenges. In terms of, I guess, the conversations that we can have, is opening up opportunities within our classrooms for these discussions to be had. I mean, there's a lot of power in just putting time and space to these conversations in our own classrooms. As a teacher myself, you know, finding ways to integrate these conversations in whatever I was doing. If we're talking about friendships and how to build good friendships offline, well, we're just bringing the word online into the conversation, because there's so much to be discussed around that. I think explicitly thinking about some of those, I guess, skills that we need to be teaching young people and exposing them to having that opportunity to talk about these things. I mean, if I think about young people today compared to when I was growing up and you were growing up, Colin, and Cecilia as well, you know, we basically had that sort of needing to develop and build skills and knowledge and understanding around how to socialize and connect with each other offline. But now young people have the offline experiences, but they also have to navigate those social skills of how to engage and interact online as well. So there's almost two sets of skills that they need. So giving time and space is really important. Role plays, unpacking scenarios, talking about challenges that exist, getting them to share their experiences and stories as well, just helps to open up that doorway for those conversations, for those young people to feel safe to talk about these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. On that line of making friends online and just digital friendships and communication, I think one of the major issues that can come from that is this constant pressure to be perfect, and that feeling of comparing yourselves to often others completely manufactured online personas that are edited and curated. Trent, you have a really great term for this, which you call the highlights reel. Would you be able to share a little bit more on what that is?
Yeah, I think the highlights reel, and we all probably have one, our social networking threads are the best bits of our lives. And, we tend to share more regularly the things that are going really well for ourselves. So if you looked at my social networking feed, it is my highlights reel. It's all the best bits of my life. We're constantly being exposed to everyone's best bits. So no wonder kids are hopping off social media feeling like maybe they're not as good as their friends, or maybe their life isn't as exciting as everybody else's, because of all of those best parts that everyone is just constantly being exposed to. I think there are definitely a generation of people out there that are trying really hard to be as honest as they can on social media, but it's still highly curated content. It's pre-recorded. I mean, if I take a selfie, there's probably 17 images of the same thing on my phone, and I've gone and picked the best one to put up on social media. And so just helping young people to understand that that's what they're being exposed to is the first step in empowering them to make those connections and thinking more outside of what they're being exposed to. But it's a very difficult period for people to be, I think even adults and anyone around the world that's connected online feels that pinch of the highlights reel in some way, shape or form.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking back to, the last event that we had as a Saasyan team in the Gold Coast, and just wanted to take a quick picture of the booth, and even then just the temptation to not want to take 50 photos, to take to find the perfect one. It's really hard not to lean into that. As you mentioned, we're both adults and are aware of that, so you can imagine how difficult that is for a student that's already in that kind of awkward period where they are figuring themselves out. They might not be fully comfortable in their own skin when they're constantly exposed to everyone's highlights reel and their best moments. Things like body dysmorphia and insecurity are really difficult. Cecilia, what would you say what are some resources that parents and schools can take to leverage to kind of combat some of these effects?
I think definitely getting involved with things like cyber-safe projects, those sorts of things is really important. But I think in everyday opening up discussions, it doesn't, you can be looking at something together with your child and have a look at what's there and discuss it and say, okay, wow, that's a really great photo. And discuss that highlights reel, like use that concept and say, what do you reckon it would look like if they did their lowlights? What would that be? and have a bit of fun with it, have those discussions, and particularly with the younger kids, because they're not dumb. They do understand this, but just like we do, but it still impacts. They know that it's someone's, photoshopped picture, but it doesn't make them not feel bad about not looking like that. So I think owning that, acknowledging it, having the discussion, try and turn it around, and definitely talking within both the home and at school so that it's coming from everywhere, and having those scenario type conversations about what would you do here, and how, what even, doing things like photoshopping a photo to see how different it can look, or looking through that process where, there's videos and things that show how they do before and afters, just getting behind the scenes a little bit so that it's kept at the front of the mind that this is not reality. They know it, but they need to be reminded just like we do.
Yeah, the ability to learn to just kind of take things with a grain of salt. I find even just on LinkedIn, not even of photos of people, sometimes when you're scrolling through and you see one accomplishment after another, everyone's so excited to share their accomplishments. It can sometimes be overwhelming, and it can make you question where you're at in life. So, in apps such as LinkedIn or Twitter that are less around the appearance, in addition to something like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, where it is all appearance based, you kind of have two different scopes that you're navigating with. My next question deals with information overexposure. And I think that, with unmonitored and unfiltered access to find the answer to any question within seconds, that small headache is often labeled cancer. And, events that were once contained to a news story now become essentially real life scenarios for thousands of people as bystander videos are shared online. not to mention just explicit content that can be easily accessed, which not only has a significant psychological impact on kids, but poses that unique challenge on how do you maintain the sense of control on the content that's accessed while still empowering that curiosity and encouraging students to take it upon themselves to do research and learn more. So this question's for both of you. I might start with Cecilia. As parents and educators and well-being professionals, how can we encourage kids and inspire curiosity while also limiting overexposure to damaging content and information?
I think there's both a more practical thing of in terms of being able to actually filter and block certain things. So certainly as a school, we've taken the approach that we block some things. We'll block pornography, those sorts of things for that online kind of search and gambling. But most things we allow and use as a teaching opportunity because we know they're going to be able to access these things outside of the school network anyway. So a lot of it is about trying to identify if someone is, feeling overloaded or getting down about things. A lot of our students might start to have some sort of almost existential crisis when they start thinking about how hard the world is and what's the point. So trying to recognise that. Often the teachers are a good point of call to be able to see some of that as well. English teachers read the essays. And so trying to have them the conversations again, because we know that they're going to be overloaded. We can't stop that. We can try and help them become critical thinkers. Think about, even when I'm searching for something, how do I do that so that I don't get too much, because it is really overwhelming. But it keeps coming back to those relationships and conversations and an awareness. And I really agree with what Trent was saying earlier about trying not to be too negative, because when we're negative and we think, we keep pointing at the dangers and what's bad, they're not going to want to talk to us. It's too negative. You need to be able to say, yeah, it's really great being able to have online friends. These are the positives. What about some of the negatives? Same with being able to search things. It's great being able to have all this information, but gee, sometimes it's hard to find the thing that you want, and being able to talk about both sides, being balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. Trent, just to kind of repeat, because I know it's been a sec, so just kind of encouraging that that curiosity while also limiting overexposure and finding the balance.
Yeah, look, I think it's, having that balanced conversation is so crucial as part of our strategy. And, thinking about the idea that we actually have access to the world's knowledge at our fingertips is a fantastic thing. I was just having a conversation with some of my friends the other day, even in the car. We're talking about who sung this particular song. It was easy just to search that up and find out the artist and the band. And if we hadn't have had our phones on us, we probably would have had to wait till we got home. And, that instant access to information is actually really beneficial. And I think even the decentralization of information and opportunities for us to seek out our information from multiple sources is a really good way for us to move forward as a society. But at the same time, I think, as we said, teaching them critical thinking skills is important. We have a strategy here called TRUE at the Cyber Safety Project. So is it trusted? So who's actually published this? Are they who created the message? Looking for the author of that is really important, because how things just get shared and shared and shared and shared. Like, go back to the original source to see where that came from, because things like, those whispers that can kind of change that message over time. The recency of that information as well, and looking at how long ago was it published, which is the R, so TR. Unbiased is you. So thinking about, well, okay, this person who's actually talking about this, like, for example, influencers, like, are they biased about this because we know it's a paid partnership here? So, that kind of area as well is being critical around that. And then E is for expert. So are they actually an expert on this? Is this something that they talk about all the time? Is this something that they actually have expertise in? Or are they just somebody who said that they heard something from a friend of a friend whose uncle said that this was true? So helping them to discern that information and look at the authorship and how it's been shared is also just really crucial as well. And if we can give them the tools to do that and practice that, I think that will help.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think just kind of recognizing that there is that opportunity of choice. We can be selective about the information that we're exposing ourselves to, and to the same logic that we would apply to, that temptation to maybe when you're driving past a car crash to look and to see, you might know that that's actually not going to have any benefit to you. So empowering students to recognize that, they have a choice with what what information they're consuming. And do you really want to see that? Do you really want to look at, the videos of perhaps like a school shooting or something? I find, for me, being that I am from the US originally, like, there's that temptation whenever I might see a news article pop up of a traumatic event to go and look at that trending hashtag on Twitter and to see those videos. But at the end of the day, is that really going to serve me, or is that just going to make me feel worse about it or be a bit fired up?
I think we can also probably help young people understand that they have the power to unfollow as well, and that they've got that choice and that power to be empowered to choose who they follow and the information that they are receiving as well. And just to know and understand some of those techniques like social engineering and the algorithms that are also feeding us a lot of content as well, because they know that, you know, that might keep us on their apps longer. And all of that knowledge and intel is just really helpful in making good choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, there's that one end of going through and actually blocking out certain content so that students don't even have the opportunity. But then there's also the opportunity to create a space where the relevant people are notified when a student is accessing that content. So that way you can address the root cause or have that conversation. So one of the things that we're really passionate about at Saasyan, rather than just purely blocking out that information or that content, is setting up alerts and reports. So that way someone like you, Cecilia, can have that meaningful conversation and address the impacts of what that would have on a student rather than just simply blocking it out.
Absolutely, because it is about teaching. Like, we don't want them to go out into the world and suddenly have access to all these things that they didn't whilst they were at school and not know how to deal with that. So it's our job as a school, not just how to teach them academic things, but also teach them how to deal with other life things. As both parents and schools, that is our job. And we can't do that if they don't have the opportunity to go a bit astray or to access things that aren't appropriate, so that we can have those discussions.
Definitely. All right, so now I'd like to talk about just this pressure to be connected that I know that we all feel. We've discussed how difficult it can be to maintain that sense of control on the content that kids are consuming. But in addition to this, just purely the time that's spent online, both while at school and at home, I think definitely continues to be an issue. And just that need for kids to feel connected to their peers, and also the anxiety that can come from not being online or feeling like one is disappointing their friends by not being available. And I think, Trent, you've shared some pretty alarming statistics pertaining to this. Are you able to share a little bit more about what you found?
Yeah, so we actually run forums with young people as well, just to truly try to get to the root causes or the root understanding of why certain things might be occurring within their community. And one of the big pieces of feedback that we get from young people is that tug of war between home, and they know that they've got that expectation to be participating in family life, but at the same time, their friends have all organized to get together to play an online game. Or we're going away on a holiday and I'm not going to have as much time to be able to connect with my friends, and they're all getting together on group chats and I'm missing out on the conversation. And that sense of I want to be with my family, but I am actually being drawn back because that fear of missing out, or FOMO. So it is really tricky for young people to be navigating those two spaces. And I think it's just important for the grown-ups, the adults, the teachers, and the parents in their lives to understand that that's the pressure that they're feeling. They're not necessarily doing it to be disrespectful. They're not necessarily doing it because they don't want to spend time with their family, but there is that sense of peer pressure to come back to that technology all the time.
Yeah. You hit the nail right on the head, just the understanding and the empathy from family or figures of authority who, definitely want to preserve that quality family time and ensure that kids are engaged either at the dinner table or on a family trip, but also just recognizing what comes from that. What would you say some actions that parents or families can take to, address this issue, recognizing that there is that need on both sides?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, those relationships and conversations, and I think both Cecilia and I come back to that all the time. It's so important to have open conversations about it. And also just arming your kids with strategies to even set boundaries with some of their friends. So for example, your best friend might be messaging you at 11 o'clock at night, but you know how important it is to get sleep, but you're feeling like your friend's always messaging you really late at night, helping them with strategies on, well, how could you set a boundary with your friend around when and where we might communicate? Because with that access to instant messaging and instant communication, there sort of aren't any boundaries. And, sometimes these types of things aren't necessarily common sense, and we don't realize until it's impacting us that we need to then put some steps in place. And we kind of have to then revert back to something and kind of the horse has bolted. So let's bring in some strategies. So sitting down and having really important conversations as a family about our values, about what's important in our lives, and setting up some boundaries at home, but also giving young people that sense of, well, how do you respond to, or how have you planned with your friends to connect online, because they'd be experiencing the same things themselves too. So working together as a community, I think, is really important, and open conversations about it is crucial.
Yeah, I think there's, it's hard to find like a set rule book for a lot of these issues because we're kind of inventing them as they come. These are not topics that families and parents had to even address 10, 15 years ago. So Cecilia, what about your perspective and while students are in school? What are some of those conversations that you're having with students, to help them be mindful of screen time or phone usage during school and, potentially distracting content that can be accessed?
I think a lot of our conversations end up being about their technology use outside of school. When they tell me that they can't study, they're having troubles with procrastination, which is the eternal thing that we talk about all the time. And often the technology comes in at that point. So at the school, they're not allowed to have their phones on them. Most of them will, but they won't admit to it because they're supposed to be in the lockers. But certainly teachers will pick up sometimes going, well, you're not doing the right thing on your laptop, you're doing something else, and have discussions around that. But when it comes to looking at their use at home, it tends to be because they've raised an issue. They've raised something around that they're not getting their homework done, or they're up too late at night. And it becomes like a really iterative process where you together work out some strategies, and then you meet, a bit later on and say, how did that go? What worked? What didn't? Let's put some more things in place. And also sharing the reasons behind it. Like I think Trent sort of mentioned before that information is kind of power. So being able to understand algorithms, that kind of thing, but also being able to look at some of the research. So there's research that shows that if you put your phone upside down a meter away from you, it's still more distracting and you're less able to concentrate. Your brain is working differently to if their phone is actually outside of the room. So being able to share some of those bits of research so that they can actually make informed decisions. But it keeps coming back to this worked for a while, or this app from app blocking sort of a thing worked for a bit, but now it's not, or now this is different. So we just keep working, keep going. Okay, well, what other strategy can you use? You don't want to leave your phone outside the room. Can you do 10 questions of your maths, and then you can go check it, but then you have to come back and leave it out there. Like it just keeps being a personal thing because different things work for different people too.
I love, Cecilia, how it's also about communicating and brainstorming ideas together. We asked some students yesterday, a grade 3 student said, I power off my iPad because it's a bit more annoying to turn it back on and wait for it to start up. And that's just the strategy that I use to stop me being distracted from things like notifications. Whereas another student said, I just make sure I've got no notifications on so that the app's not drawing me back and I can choose when I go. So hearing different ways other people help themselves with this technology. I mean, I've heard an adult who turns their phone to black and white because it's less appealing to look at. So if we can be sharing those really good strategies with each other and just openly talking about them, we might find that we're all experiencing similar problems as well. And I think that then highlights that opportunity that we're all the same, we're all experiencing this. Let's share those great ideas. And the other thing is, I think that, even as adults, we struggle with a lot of this stuff too. And so we've got to be really practicing this and modeling this with young people to help them see that we're trying our best to do this as well.
Yes, as you were talking, I was just thinking about that. And that's one of those things, like I know my kids have told me off because I'm looking at the phone instead of looking at them when they're talking to me. So it is about that modeling and about practicing, but also because it is hard for us, we're all on the same page. So we can share that struggle as well. So it's not like we're the experts and our young people have no idea. It's that we're all dealing with it and we can share ideas between us. And then it becomes a conversation rather than a telling off.
I love that. Thank you both. Yeah, Cecilia, I was talking to you about this last week. I think that self-control and impulse control is hard for all of us, but especially for kids, in these upper high school years, that's one of the most challenging concepts to master. I ended up I have an old phone lying around that I should trade in. It's an old iPhone 6S that I ended up just trying to install my social media apps on that device so that I physically leave that outside of the bedroom, outside of my workplace, so that way I'm not tempted. Because once you start that, you pick up your phone to respond to an email and you see a bunch of other notifications that's just so tempting to go through. So I think there's that element of removing the temptation, which you said you've done by having that no phones policy, or asking the personal devices to be used or to be left in their lockers, which I think is a great approach. For those who don't know, Saasyan has 3 essential primary values. The first is that classroom control piece, where you would actually fully just eliminate the distraction or temptation, or block a specific category or piece of content from being accessed. The other two deal with those advanced alerts for things like cyberbullying, self-harm, and online activity reporting, which bring about this idea of proactive counseling. And with this, comes enabling schools with resources to be able to address emerging issues before they happen, to take that proactive approach in student well-being. I think that definitely the most common and practical use case are those instant notifications against something like cyberbullying and self-harm, to allow schools to quickly respond and address to those online issues. But I think that there's definitely an opportunity to take this step a little bit further, and to address some of the many issues that we've just talked about, and support this overall idea of proactive counseling. So Cecilia, you've been a longtime user of Assure at Melbourne High School, and I'd love to hear just some of the creative ways that you've leveraged the software to address student behavior and well-being issues.
There's an individual basis where we're looking at, the alerts that come up and deciding, is this something that we want to follow up? Is this something that we need to, either as a matter of urgency, because there is a level of risk? Typical things might be, what's a painless way to suicide? Those sorts of things. They need urgent follow-up, obviously. And, we can address that, and we can talk to the student, and they'll say, well, actually, the reason I'm concerned is because I know that you've, in Period 5 English, this is what you were Googling. Can we have a chat about that? And they are remarkably open. Usually when we do ask directly, we will get a direct answer. Another way is when there's things that are a bit lower level, so they're not an immediate risk, but there are things that we go, oh, look, this person keeps coming up. They keep having alerts against their name, or there's certain things that they might be Googling, or the conversations on Teams as well. I don't know, people haven't used it, they won't know, but you get a report each day. It gets sent out in the evening, so we look at it the next morning, and it's got all the, the alerts from the day, but there's a little button to hit investigate. And most of the things that we get are either things that people have Googled, or very often they're Teams chats. So you'll hit go to investigate, and you can see the entire chat. And then you can kind of make up your mind about whether it's something that needs dealing with or not. But you can pull that student in either just for a general sort of wellbeing check, just to say, hey, I'm just checking in with a lot of students. And it gives them the opportunity to both hear about our confidentiality type policy, and also to meet us and see the room and hear about what we do. And often we find that if we've done that, the student might come back at a later date because they know where we are, they know what to expect. So it gives us an opportunity to introduce ourselves. The other level is looking at that more as holistic things, as I said before, the language use. If we're noticing certain phrases or words are being used more commonly, then that's something that we can address on a much broader level as a school, and it might be in their personal development classes. We make sure that they talk about the impact of language use. I mean, we have a current issue at the moment, which is not language that's necessarily considered problematic usually, but we are an all-boys school, but we have students that don't identify as male. So the gendered language use, when a lot of the posts on Teams come up from both staff and students saying, hey boys, or gentlemen this, and the impact that has on our non-male identifying students. So it allows us to sort of look at those things as well.
Yeah, I love that, finding an opportunity to address, when you have the time, not to, address the immediate issues, but an opportunity to just spread awareness on plenty of other just as important issues. I think 30 years ago, if a student was even just wanting to explore a new diet, first of all, to find information about that, they would have gone to the library that had vetted content by the school that was curated and safe. Now, a student can quickly find, information on a whole slew of potentially unsafe practices to lose weight. So having the ability to even generate a report for maybe every search that has been executed for just how to lose weight, something like that, to really take that a little bit further, to be able to have those meaningful conversations in a proactive way. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, Trent, my last question is for you, and that deals with some of those regulations and requirements for student protection that you were mentioning. As you said, we're lucky enough in Australia to have several governing bodies in place to safeguard both physical and digital safety of students. And whether this is the standards set forth by AIDSL or the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership, or something like the Victoria Child Safe Standards, which were just updated on July 1st. Would you be able to tell us about some of both the changes that have taken place, but also the current standards that aim to safeguard student safety?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, firstly, across Australia, particularly we all have in each state a commissioner for children and young people at varying ways that we can interact with those. But, as teachers and educators and parents and carers and coaches, we are sort of bound by, I guess, a set of standards that are there in place to keep and protect young people, both for their safety and their well-being. So the recent changes in Victoria specifically, really, it's great to see that there's been some introduction to just some of those conversations around the online spaces and environments that we're creating and engaging kids in and getting them to use within the school community, but also not just the school community, it's broader than that. It's clubs and all sorts of spaces where many people are using and leveraging the power of technology to help connect kids socially, but also through education, learning, and even just communicating in general. So Standard 9 in the new Victorian child safe standards really outlines that idea of the two things, particularly around code of conducts and schools having a code of conduct around the collection of privacy and the right to privacy. And Cecilia, I think you mentioned there, it's about making sure young people know and understand we're collecting that information about them, but also that there is that limit to the confidentiality that is within that system. And so making sure that the community is well informed and educated about that is really important. And then I think as well as, we have to always remember our role and duty of care. And as educators, one of our standards in best practice teaching and leading in schools as well is that we are bound by the AITSL standards. And there is also a lot for us to, I guess, as teachers to be navigating outside of just our normal teaching load and what we're normally doing in our classrooms, whether that be primary or secondary, is that we also really do need to be able to demonstrate the ability to know and understand the current ethical dilemmas, the challenges, and how to use ICT effectively and safely, and helping to model that in our classrooms as well.
Definitely. Thank you for that. Well, at this point, I would love to move on to our Q&A and open it up to anyone in attendance. It looks like we've got a couple of questions already in there. If anyone else wants to add any to it, just feel free to pop those in the Q&A. We'll go ahead and start with Sydney's question for both of you. What conversations and training are taking place or need to take place about well-being for school leadership, either for private schools or at the board level? Trent, I'll start with you since you're here.
Yeah, look, I think there's mandatory type of training that's required for schools, which is things like mandatory reporting. But then it's really up to every school individually to how they then engage in professional learning and with their school staff, educators, and the wider community. But we know that there are so many schools that are doing amazing things with ensuring that they are keeping their staff up to date with the latest trends. I think wellbeing is certainly a big focus right now across schools across Australia, not just for student wellbeing, but even just community wellbeing, educator wellbeing as well. And just those help-seeking strategies and those really highlighting those key important things are certainly at the forefront, I think, of many people's minds. And that's a lot of the work that we're doing, particularly this year back with, so many schools back on site now after all of those lockdowns across Australia. There have been impacts, and it's become a big focus around that. So a lot of our the choices of the options that we do within schools and how that we support schools through our professional learning programs, a lot of schools are choosing to do our wellbeing pathway because that's certainly an area of interest.
Awesome. Thanks, Cecilia. How about you?
Well, working in Victoria, certainly the Department of Education has updated their framework for improving student outcomes. ISO 2.0 is out now, and that is very much, it is what the Department of Education has as their guiding framework for schools to develop their strategic plans and then their annual sort of implementation plans. And with the version 2.0, we've got the central theme is learning and wellbeing. So they're two equally weighted items at that very centre of that framework. So there's certainly a recognition that wellbeing is important, and increasingly so, particularly after all the lockdowns and things that we've had. So there is a push to include considerations of wellbeing more extensively throughout strategic planning and all those sorts of things. At our school level, there's, we're getting more funding from various places to be able to implement things, like even this year we've started doing the mental health first aid training so that training up, myself and my colleague are now able to facilitate the training so we can train our teaching and other staff. And then we're looking at also going on to actually train students. And that's just one more way to raise awareness of wellbeing and mental health, to destigmatise further, and to open up those conversations and get people to feel more confident in dealing with things that might happen, because there's too many people with issues for it to always be coming just to a wellbeing professional. And it's about students helping each other, parents helping students, staff helping students, and that's really important.
Is it all right if I add something to that as well? I think we've got two big areas at the moment too that a lot of schools are focusing on, which is respectful relationships and that curriculum. So there is a lot of schools doing some amazing work around embedding those frameworks within their schools. And we've just had an update to the V9 Australian curriculum, which is sort of rolling out now into next year as well. And under the general capabilities, there's also now things like digital literacies, and those digital literacies have 4 key pillars, and a lot of the pillars that sit within that are managing well-being of young people in the community. So I think that these frameworks are fantastic that they exist and that they're out there, and there's these guidelines and there's these new frameworks and standards. What we're going to now hopefully see as a result of that is that trickling into classrooms and teachers really embracing these ideas in the way that they're being creative in helping their young people in their community.
Absolutely, because it does come back to the classroom, and it comes back to what happens in that everyday situation, and teachers having the capability, the confidence to be able to raise these issues. And it might be in the English class or the art class where they talk about self and they talk about these capabilities, and it's really important that it's integrated. It's not like a little add-on on the side.
Absolutely.
Well, in the essence of time, I think I'm going to combine some of these questions. So one of them is for both of you again. So how do you see the counselling of students changing with technology becoming more prevalent? Does that raise concerns with students becoming more withdrawn? And the second question is, how can you teach kids, or what can you teach kids to do if they see a friend suffering or being a victim of cyberbullying?
Well, I certainly think that throughout lockdowns, we had to become more withdrawn. That was sort of the rules. So there is a lot more use of the online technology for socialising. But I think it's really important to recognise that a lot of that can be positive as well. Sometimes someone might not have someone who shares their interests or who they feel understand them or they feel comfortable talking to in real life, but they might find someone online. And obviously we need to ensure that those connections are legitimate, safe, all those good things. But I think there's a real value in online connections, and there's a lot to be gained. So we really have to look at that positive side as well in terms of that stuff. But in terms of the cyberbullying, and if you're worrying about self-harm, would very much encourage kids to talk to someone. If you're worried about safety, absolutely, you need to find a trusted adult. It doesn't really matter who that is. You need to find someone that you feel comfortable to talk to about it. And same with the bullying. It's about making sure our children don't take that on for themselves, but you can also give them tools and find out, talking about things like the bystander versus an upstander, giving them tools for what they might say to diffuse the situation. Using humour is often like a really powerful way to diffuse a situation without ending up in the firing line yourself, which is often the fear as well. A few different items there, Trent.
Yeah, look, I think, if we flip the 1 in 3 young people feel safe to talk to a parent or a teacher or a trusted adult, that means that 2 in 3 actually in our survey said that they would reach out to a friend first, which often means that they're the first responders when it comes to this stuff. And quite often they're not necessarily equipped themselves with the structures and the conversations and the ability to support a friend. So I think it's always about encouraging that, no matter when that situation occurs, to be offering that sort of way about how do we connect to an adult here. And also I think promoting services like the kids helpline, e-safety, and giving them the resources to be able to get that help. So maybe the friend's really upset, they're telling their best friend that they're being bullied online. That's an opportunity for a young person to, if they had conversations at school about the kids helpline and e-safety, that they might say, well, have you spoken to the kids helpline? Have you reached out and looked at the resources at e-safety to get that help that you might need? Or do you want me to help you have a conversation with the Year 9 coordinator? So really arming young people with clear steps to take, almost like we would if it was any other sort of well-being or health issue, where kids would always run and tell an adult if someone fell over in the yard and hurt their knee. Well, it's the same thing. It's giving that as the habit that we're getting into. Those steps is really important.
Yeah. Last question, or we've got two more, sorry. So next we've got Sam. Is it better to be entirely restrictive of the content that students access, or have a little bit of leniency with added support or monitoring? Cecilia, I think I'll direct that to you.
Yeah, look, I definitely think leniency is important, because we don't want to just be controlling the whole time and then set them free to the world once they leave school. We want them to learn to be critical thinkers. We want them to be able to make mistakes potentially and learn from those, and be able to be aware of them. So with that monitoring, we can pull them up, we can have those conversations, but we can't if we don't know what they want to search, because they're just doing it at home on their phone. So I'd much rather that we have a very open network, with a few exceptions of the things we really can't allow, but then have that opportunity for those conversations and to monitor. I think that is a much better way to help them develop.
Yeah, I would suggest that there's, and Cecilia, obviously this is happening at your school, but we have to be very mindful of the maturity scale, I guess, of your school. And, if we've got this ability to have the leniency over the, what they can search and what is available on your network, is that you have to have the policy and education framework and those pillars that sit around all of this also in place. So it's not really one or the other. It's not just a blanket yes or a no from my perspective. It's actually making sure that we've got a clear purpose for why that is, and that's certainly the case. I know at your school, Cecilia, is that having those other elements in place, those pathways for support, the education around these are just as critical as it is the technology infrastructure that we might be embedding, or the things that we're turning on or off.
I think technology is always a tool, isn't it? That's what we want to teach our young people, and that's what we need to remember ourselves. It's not the answer, it's a tool that we can use to inform us and to help us to do better. So.
Wonderful. Last question. This is from an anonymous attendee. Cecilia, since introducing Assure, have you noticed an improvement in student well-being? I might add one point to that. Have you noticed an improvement in your response to well-being issues as well?
I think we have identified more well-being issues. It's very hard to know what the rate is in terms of that. We do regular screening now, but we didn't before Assure in terms of wellbeing screening. And certainly the last few years, wellbeing has declined with COVID and the restrictions. So it's very hard to say whether Assure has helped us to improve it, but it's absolutely helped us to be able to respond and identify more issues. So we end up being busier as a wellbeing team instead of less busy, but I think that's a positive thing, because it has improved help seeking. It's improved our ability to go and offer support to people. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you both for just your willingness to jump on this and for all the insight that you shared. As we conclude our month of wellbeing, I think that it's become even more clear just how crucial our mission is to ensure the online safety of K-12 students, and that this is a mission that truly has just begun. I want to emphasize that this doesn't stop here, and to all of our current customers who are attending this session, I just want to thank all of you for your support and continuing to share your stories with us, and the inspiring and creative ways that you leverage Assure in your school. To anyone wanting to learn more, we invite you to reach out to hello@saasyan.com to explore Assure for your school, and follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn to stay updated. Trent and Cecilia, it was a pleasure having you join us, and to all of our attendees, thank you again so much for joining, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you for having
so
us.
much. Thanks, Colin. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, guys. Take care.